Thank you everyone for being here today. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Andrew MacDonald. And if my online researching skills are as good as I think they are, he spends most of his time playing defense for the New York Islanders. But in the off chance that there is another Andrew MacDonald that is findable via Google, I'll focus on the writing side of his life. He grew up in Edmonton and in North Bay, and then began his post-secondary studies at Fanshawe College. And was a successful graduate of what at the time was called the Liberal Studies program. It's now the University Preparatory Stream in General Arts and Sciences. Then he went on, he stayed in London and continued on to study English at King's University College at Western. And as a graduate of the English program at King's, I can say that it's where the best people go to study. So Andrew went there and then went to graduate school at the University of Toronto, where he studied English and creative writing and where he was mentored by the Canadian writer Michael Winton. There he was also the winner of the inaugural Adam Penn Gilders Award for Best Graduate Creative Thesis for one of his stories. Since then, his career as a writer has included his short stories having appeared regularly in literary journals across Canada and the United States. Titles such as The Fiddlehead, Event, PRISM International, The Pinch, and Riddle Fence. His writing has been awarded a Western Magazine Award for fiction, and a story of his was a finalist for the prestigious Journey Prize, and was accordingly collected in the anthology, the 22nd anthology, the Journey Prize Stories for Canada's Best Young Writers.
We have that here for sale.
Which is for sale, yeah. He's also, I don't think it's been published yet, but the Best Writers Under 35, a story of his is to appear in that book as well. I'll leave you with one memory that I have of Andrew when he was a student here. I was marking essays, which takes up a lot of my time, as you can imagine. And I was doing a little thing that English professors don't often admit to, but it's true. When I saw that I had an essay from a particularly good student, a strong writer, I saved it. I put in a few essays in so that I would get to it after reading some other essays. And I did this with Andrew's, and when I got to it, I remember reading it and then calling my wife into the room and I said, listen to this guy. And I read some of what he had written. Now lots of people are saying, listen to this guy write. To say to you, listen to this guy write. So it's my pleasure. Please join me in welcoming Andrew MacDonald.
Hello? All right. Who here is not forced to be here? Who here is by choice? No, you're forced to be here. You're not fooling anybody. As Callum said, I actually went here when it was like a third of its size. I noticed you sprouted buildings everywhere. And I'm really happy to be here. My experience was really great. I've been told I have to mention this, but I absolutely bombed high school. I was the worst high school student you would ever imagine, except when it came to playing sports. And when I came to Fanshawe, it was kind of a revelation. It was someone giving me a chance to show that I actually had academic skill instead of just playing sports. I used to wrestle, I used to play basketball. And I had scholarships for both of those, but my academics killed it for me. Anyways, in the year that I was graduating high school, I met a girl. And I thought, wow, she's really attractive. What devious ways can I choose to pick her up? And being an idiot, I thought, you know, she probably likes poetry. And I'm a terrible poet. And so I wrote this terrible poem, and she fell for it, / felt sorry for me. And she moved, went to Western. I went to Fanshawe. But I always felt like the biggest idiot because I didn't get to go to Western. But as it turns out, some of the smartest people I know actually went to Fanshawe and ended up going to Western because when they were in high school, you know, things didn't quite work out the way it might have worked out for people who were into more academic interests. So, yay, good Fanshawe. Okay, I promised I'd tell that story, so now it's gone. I'm happy you guys are all here, and I had to think about what I would read to you. Maybe some people want to write in the future. So I thought I'd pick something. I picked 3 things, and I had to choose between them. And I have a little speech about each and every one of them, but I kind of threw all 3 away and picked this. I'm not going to give it any kind of introduction, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it, hoping that you don't think I'm the asshole in the story. But we can talk about that later if you think that's the case. This story is called 4 Minutes, and afterwards I want to talk to you about why I wrote it, how it's not autobiographical, but it kind of is, and how telling stories often come from places you don't really expect, and how something may seem completely unrelated to your life, but when you actually start thinking about it, like I've thought about this story, it turns out that it has a lot more to do with your life than you think. Okay, so this is called 4 Minutes, and I'm just going to kind of wander around because just like doing that. Okay, 4 minutes. My twin sister is wearing a lace bra with lace panties that don't match. She expects me to know which one will turn on her boyfriend. She believes that a combination of 2 separate styles is something he'll find enticing. I don't know, I say, they all look the same, which is true. Underwear is as foreign to me as German dialects from the Second World War. Women in the underwear store are looking at us. An employee occasionally comes over. You know what, I'm going to lower this guy. Let's see.
Stand in the light, Andy.
How's this? Oh, it's even worse.
Romeo has made him laugh. He's our...
You know what, I'm just going to turn it off and talk because I'm old school like that. Okay. I don't know, they all look the same, I say, which is true. Underwear is as foreign to me as German dialects from the Second World War. Women in the underwear store are looking at us. An employee occasionally comes over and asks if we need help. Zelda says no, that the woman's opinion isn't the opinion she wants. It's my opinion she wants. Or actually, it's my ex-girlfriend's opinion. What would Emily want, Zelda asks. She comes outside to the area between the change room and the store proper, wearing the mismatched underwear and patting a kind of Morse code on her stomach. This is a common Zelda behavior. Nudity as a concept is less confusing than the necessity of always being dressed. Put some clothes on, please, I say, or at least go over there so no one else can see you. She rests her head against the wall and makes a burbling sound. Tell me what Emily would wear, she says. I tell her a lie. I tell her that Emily never wore underwear. The truth is that I don't remember what Emily wore, and that kind of disturbs me. This fact disturbs me more than discussing what underwear my sister is going to wear when she loses her virginity. The event is marked on the calendar beside the fridge. Emily and Zelda always got along. Emily took Zelda for gelato and tried to teach her to read Russian, even though Zelda can't really read English past the 4th grade level. They used to practice their signatures together, filling up page after page in the living room of the apartment. While Zelda's signature is a free-range farm of loops and parabolas, Emily's signature has the tightness of a compressed accordion. According to an internet website on graphology, Emily's small signature means she has good career aims and doesn't waste time or effort. Zelda's means she cannot face criticism. I like Emily, Zelda used to announce. Emily likes Zelda, Emily would say, and she'd make a mallet out of her hand and bonk it on Zelda's skull in a Three Stooges routine they'd worked out. When Emily left me for her old roommate, Zelda asked me why Emily didn't love me anymore. I don't know, I said. People fall out of love sometimes. Are you going to fall out of loving me? Zelda asked. We were watching a movie about penguins, and for the first time since the baby penguins head-butted their way out of their shells, she looked away from the TV and fixed her big baby blue eyes on me. No, Z, I said, pausing the penguin movie. No, the love we have is a forever thing. Culpability is a difficult thing to process. Zelda has drawn pictures of it. In some of them, me as baby in the womb wears a cowboy hat and lassos her as fetus around the neck. According to internet studies, 30 seconds of restricted oxygen can cause 6% brain damage. The umbilical cord attached to me choked her for 4 minutes. The disability pension she gets is enough to cover the apartment, while my job at the call center part-time for the time being pays enough for our other expenses. How Zelda saved up enough money for her fancy underwear and her condoms and her makeup is something I don't understand. Show me how to use the rubber thing again, Zelda says. I've already showed you 3 times, I say. Then she frowns and flops on the couch, turning her back to me. I can tell she's pouting, making a show of it. We don't have any more bananas, so I use a carrot. She chastises me about using my teeth to open the condom wrapper. You should never do that, she says, since it could break the rubber thing. Good, I say, fumbling with the carrot. You've passed up test number 1. While putting the condom on the carrot, pinching the top like they say in the pamphlets you get at Planned Parenting, the end of the carrot accidentally pokes through the rubber. Zelda laughs, I laugh, and suddenly the world isn't the kind of place where terrible things happen in waves. It's a nice, wholesome place where vegetables are responsible enough to use protection. In the car, she wants me to tell her about my first time again. She thinks it was with Emily, and I don't have the heart to tell her that it was with a person I didn't know, who I met at a bar when I was 18. You can be 18 and drink in Alberta. Zelda believes that people mate for life, just like swans. Did it hurt? Zelda asks. She's like Baroque painters in this regard, obsessed with human capacity for suffering. The drawings she makes suggest that losing virginity is right up there with waterboarding on the Harvard pain scale. The faces of her mating stick creatures are corkscrews of agony. They end up on the fridge with the rest of her crayon artwork. Once, when I was drunk, I told her the details, and now I can't leave anything out, or she'll get mad. I was so inexperienced that when I first had sex, I actually tore some of the skin on myself and bled everywhere. Yikes. I wonder if there's a particular recliner in hell for brothers who tell their sisters things like this on the night they're supposed to lose their virginity. Do you think Marxie is like that? Zelda asks. She sounds out every word. Circumcised. Was Dad circumcised? Unknown to both questions. I turn on the radio, hoping Zelda gets that I don't want to talk anymore. Once she walked in on Emily and I having sex. At that particular point in our relationship, things had only just started to get the mist native to polluted relationships. The time we spent together approximated a pre-op phase prior to the white picket fence. We often talked about down payments for condominiums, of future advancements made in the name of our relationship. There was a ring made of endlessly folded Canadian silver, topped with a speck of a diamond, that was delicate seeming but sturdy. An understated geological wonder that reminded me of Emily. I'd squirreled away almost $8,000 for it. We'd been watching a documentary, Emily and I. I'd put Zelda to bed and could tell from Emily's eyes that amorous activity was on the horizon. Partly she'd been inspired by the beauty of a pair of mating snails on the Planet Earth DVD. You've all seen it, come on. The one about the rainforest. The things stretched out of their shells, turning an almost crystal blue as they hung from a tree on an ever-stretching teardrop of goo and coiled around each other until the body of one was imperceptible from the body of the other. Shit, that's romantic, I said. One had to acknowledge for invertebrate creatures with underdeveloped nervous systems, they knew how to fornicate. It's been a bit, Emily said, lifting my shirt and making a pink mess of my navel with her fingernails. I think it's time we got like the snails and synthesized. Someone said that to me, by the way. In long-term relationships, best line. What excites must be cherished, be the muse wingtip garden clogs or screwing snails. We went at it with brutality, a violence of entwining limbs. Normally we used condom. This round we didn't even have time. Our lovemaking became a thing so grand neither of us noticed Zelda, awestruck, under the door's arch. She caught my eyes and waved. Howdy, she announced, snapping me out of my rhythm. What did we say about fucking knocking? I shouted. I threw a shoe and damaged her cornea so severely we had to take her to the hospital. What were you thinking? Emily kept asking. They were both in the backseat of the car, Emily cooing soothingly in my sister's ear. Every so often she dabbed at a mark I'd made on her neck. A crosshatch of blood vessels popped under the skin by my lips. I said I didn't know, even though I did know. Even then, I could feel her turning into air, if pressed to triangulate the exact moment at which Emily stopped loving me. All signs point to here. Occasionally, she still calls to ask how Zelda is doing. The other day, we have a conversation about Zelda and Marksy, the kid making their own two-back beast. I don't follow your lingo, Scotty, Emily says. Is two-back beast like an arts and craft activity? Zelda liked making things out of other people's waste and spent every Tuesday at the local community center, surrounded by mountains of multicolored construction paper spaghetti with people a third her age and people with developmental issues. I still fall into thinking of her like a child, something Emily endlessly chastised me about. She has a right to be sexually active, Emily says. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. At least this way you'll be there. This next part's about London, by the way. Like needle containers in public libraries, I say. Emily says, come again? The public library downtown has these fluorescent containers in one of the stalls, a hazardous waste sticker stamped on the side. The idea is this: if you're up to any intravenous activities, say plucking your arm with a heroin needle, you can dispose of whatever's punctured your veins in these safety buckets. Emily makes a chortling spit sound into the phone. That's for diabetics, idiots. Or addicts, I say. Have you ever seen a diabetic shooting insulin in a library? Not I. But I've seen junkies wiping their asses with encyclopedia pages when a fresh roll of toilet paper is in the next stall. It's the idea that you should, facilitate something potentially problematic, say like a drop box for dirty drug needles, which could enforce the whole problem and encourage the whole problem and encourage more junkies to use more needles. On the other hand, the library would ostensibly be a safer place, since there would ostensibly be less needles lying around for toddlers to swallow and the like. Ostensibly, Emily says. Correct. At this point, I feel partially redeemed for being disgusting. In the last 2 years we were together, Emily repeating my words back to me had always signified solidarity of opinion, especially when it came to words she didn't use very much in her everyday life. In the 2 years we were together, plus the year of courting, not with poems, plus the 4 months since we parted ways, I've never heard her say ostensibly. I love you still, I say. It's not even remotely the same thing, Emily says. If you're arguing that they're the same thing, what you're doing is arguing with Zelda having a sex life equals junkies shooting up in public spaces and leaving their diseased fucking needles everywhere, which is a complete and utter bullshit thing to say about your sister, Scott. She stops. And don't ever say that again. About Zelda? About loving me still. Now I have to go, it's your decision as to what you do. But if she calls me and asks her to help her, I will help her. Sex can actually be a beautiful expression of love between two people, Scott. She hangs up. In between punching the wall and regretting punching the wall, I notice that Zelda has been doodling pictures of naked, four-limbed, upright creatures that could, ostensibly, be taken for humanoid. Emily says hi, I tell her, stepping over her crayon pornography in search of a Corona. And FYI, it doesn't look like that. Just so you know, it looks like this. I make my fingers into a gun and blow my own brains out. Zelda laughs and mimics the movement before falling on her back. The gun in her hand becomes a fist she starts licking. It's a joke Emily taught her. A parody of an old me who used to overrate the use of tongue while kissing intimately. I find my Corona and crack it open on the edge of the dining room table, thwacking off a small spear of wood. Zelda has stopped laughing. We all miss Emily, she says to one of her drawings. This one incomplete. A pair of headless, legless torsos. The clerk at the motel swivels around in his chair lazily. His fingers shine with the dust of potently flavored cheese doodles, the sheen glowing when he licks each pad individually. His name tag announces something incomprehensible, either pat or tat, maybe clat. Is there some kind of convention, the clerk asks, clacking the keyboard on his orange fingers. Pardon, I say, of them. He points his pen at Zelda, who's found an itch on herself that seems to travel from her ear to her neck to her shoulder. She walks around the lobby, examining the black and white framed reproduction of Paris in the 1930s. Her dress already has a mystery stain on the ribs. If you're going to say retards, I say, or gesture verbally in that direction, I think we're going to have a problem here. The clerk shrugs, probably stoned, probably thinking of saying retard, but not prepared to deal with the repercussions of doing so. Like I was going to say, people dressed up for prom. Good, I hand him my credit card. That's the correct answer. We make our way down the motel's L-shaped corridor that winds around what could be a leisure area. The concrete pool cracked and empty, not much more than a gouge.
Discarded swimming stuff scattered around the pool's gums. We find our room on the second floor right across from the place where Zelda's boyfriend and his mother are staying. After setting up a base camp in our own room, we walk across the hall and Zelda slaps at the door. Marksy participates in Zelda's bi-weekly social group for younger adults with developmental issues. He's taller than I remember, his hair Brillo creamed to the left in a side part that belongs in the 50s. Unlike Zelda, who could pass for the rest of us unless you really gave her a hard stare, Marksy wears his condition irrefutably, just enough features exaggerated to tip you off. Zelda has introduced us a few times when I had picked her up from group to group. Still, he's cleaned up nice and makes a passable Casanova, holding flowers out to Zelda when he opens the door. "Well, howdy, partner," I say, standing awkwardly to the side as Zelda kisses him in a way that looks an awful lot like the techniques she's been practicing on her fist. Normally I would jimmy myself between them, a human prophylactic. But a voice eerily similar to Emily's echoes in my brain saying, "What's the point? In 2 hours' time, things will have reached critical mass between them." The woman I assume to be Marksy's mother appears behind him, nudging past them both to shake my hand. "You must be Scotty," she says. She introduces herself as Pearl. Her fingers are clammy in my hands, though warm to the touch. From the way she wrote her emails, I thought she might have been a teenager. No grown-up woman I've ever met indulges in that many emoticons. But she's not a teenager. Best way to describe her would be a woman, fully grown and languid in a way that summons up memories of touching yourself raw over old underwear catalogs. I have trouble imagining Marksy being grown in her uterus. From an objective standpoint, factoring her age, she's not bad looking. Her hair is blonde and she has fairly high cheekbones, which men are supposed to find appealing. Part of me is glad I'm taller than she is. The bowl of her bra, the fringe of which I can see from under my sunglasses, is a different kind of fabric than the rest of it. Some kind of fluffy white stuff knitted together. Marksy and Zelda quit kissing and we all migrate into the hotel room. "Drinks, anyone?" Pearl asks, lifting up a bottle of Jack Daniels. Marksy raises a hand, so Zelda raises a hand. Soon I'm the only one not raising a hand. "Maybe we could save that for later," I suggest, even though the fog of a good buzz would make the situation seem more reasonable. Zelda has never been drunk as far as I know. She turns and pulls on the skin of my elbow, tugging the excess skin taut. With her other hand, she holds Marksy's hand. "Please," she asks. "1 or 2 nips can't hurt," Pearl says. She's already pouring out 4 plastic cups. Irrespective of one's gender, erections are a difficult thing to avoid staring at. When Marksy walks around, he announces himself against the fabric of his suit pants. "I think it's cute," Pearl says. "It shows he's passionate in love with your sister." She's turned on the television set to one of those adult music channels that plays music that's to the ear what lava lamps are to the eye. Marksy and Zelda have started dancing together, vaguely approximating a box step. Neither of them knows much how to lead. As they turn, Marksy's erection moves like the dial of a compass. "That's sweet," Pearl says, flopping down on the bed next to me. She kicks off her heels and starts massaging one of her calves. She's quite a few IQ points under Marksy, but on the whole, I think they're pretty compatible. I swish the whiskey between my teeth and swallow the burning. "Seems that way," I say. "She didn't have enough oxygen, is that right?" "Some umbilical cord issues?" I nod and say, "It wrapped around her neck." She puts back her alcohol and pours another few fingers into her cup. The song shifts to a slow, grinding song that confuses Marksy and Zelda. He wants to keep the old pace while she's already adjusting to the change of the rhythm. Eventually they synchronize, bumping into each other like billiard balls. The deal was I'd buy the room where it happened, while Pearl and I would sit tight, making pleasantries, and wait for nature to run its course in another room. "Zelda and Scott," Pearl says. She's got a deck of cards and does a professional job of shuffling, the cards spinning from one another in a pink checkered blur. Why does that sound familiar? Ever read Great Gatsby? Not since high school. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote it. The love interest in it's based on his wife Zelda. Huh, named after a married couple. Pearl deals out a handful of cards, sculpting them into 2 piles. I'm not sure what we're playing, but fan out the cards anyways. Pearl flips over a card from the deck and snaps it on the bed between us. Without meaning to, I start thinking about how I might feel to surfboard down the contours of her chest. 2 years since Emily left me and parachuted into someone's life, and I'd only made it with one other woman, easily to recollect now as a window smudge. We'd been drunk and failing, the last 2 people at a martini bar with a jukebox. Ah, the martini bar, there's one here. How about that? It only played Britpop. The number she left sat dormant in my pants for days. By the time I remembered it, the washing machine had smelted into gummy paste. I'm drunk, I say, putting my cards down, slurping the booze through the filter of my teeth. Figures as much. You've been sucking those down like you mean it. Instead of crumpling, the plastic cup splits into shards when I give it a squeeze. How do you suppose they're doing over there? I say. Fine, I imagine. I gave Marcy a lecture or two on how to treat a lady, etc. Jesus. I stand up and start scanning the room for another plastic cup. Pearl leans back, using her arms to buttress herself. A slug of a vein pokes up from under her skin, right near the elbow. One of the things I learned straight off having a son like Marcy, someone who will never be like other people, is that you have to accept reality while doing your best to improve living conditions. You think it's normal for a mother to be teaching her son how to please a woman? The Pope would not approve. But if I don't show him what to do, who will? He can't even spell his own name 30% of the time. The glow coming off from the half-lit sign outside the motel hits her face in a strange way, and for a minute she could be made of freshly blown glass. In the glow I reach out for her thigh. We both seem surprised when I make contact. We should probably put the brakes on, she says. I told my therapist I'd stop doing this kind of thing. She doesn't elaborate on how I went from being a good brother to a thing. She gets up, flicks on the TV, and sits on the other bed. A laugh track pulses from the channel. Pearl messes her hair. Are you a fan of improvisational comedy? She died a horrible death, I say. Who? Zelda Fitzgerald. Was in a mental institution while being zapped by electroshock and a fire broke out. She was caught inside and got burned to a crisp. The look on her face is a photograph of the look I'd seen 100 times on Emily's. Am I trying to be funny, or am I secretly praying for locusts to descend over the evening and make the sky black? Well, aren't you a ray of sunshine this evening, Pearl says, flopping back on the bed. Sometime, watching skits on television, I fall asleep. No dreams come to me, just jets of color, par for the course when I've been into the drink. Blue, purple, red, my brain projecting for me a buzzing panorama. None of them make it clear to my dream self that my sister is in another room, making love or screwing or whatever you want to call it. Now, I've never owned a cat, but they say the awful bastards have modulated their howls to replicate the sound of babies wailing, a Darwinian trick that makes them impossible to ignore even when you're asleep. Something about babies crying hardwired into the circuitry of our brain. Waking up, I think only two things are happening. Either a cat's fallen off something very tall and landed on its head, or a particular kind of sicko is doing a very bad thing to an infant. Just relax, honey, Pearl is saying, ushering in a haze of nakedness I come to recognize as my sister. Her body shivers, hiccups. She's got tears making a glimmering mess of her face. Soon Marcy rumbles in the room, a towel around his waist. Stay a ways back, Marcy, Pearl says. Marcy's hair is still stiff to one side. He's crying, too. I did what you said the way you said, he says to the air. It's okay, Pearl says. Just sit over there. She wraps a blanket around Zelda. Marcy doesn't even notice me. For all I know, I'm just a figment of his imagination. Zelda rolls up into a little walnut shape, squeezing her legs together around her hands. This is the shape of something that suffered, I decide. And it occurs to me just then that Marcy's face might make an ideal landing pad for the ridges of my fist. I complete the operation quickly. The interaction of our bones echoing the sound Tupperware containers make when they're opened very quickly. And so I see red. The sound of my hand hitting Marcy's nose is the only external stimulus that makes it into my brain. Instantly, I understand that there's been some kind of miscalculation here. Pearl turns herself into a human shield, using the hem of her untucked blouse as a cork to stop the blood coming out of Marcy's nose. He whimpers, curling into a shell of his own. Something has gone wrong here. Brothers do things for their sisters. They take action when action is required. Should a bullet whistle through the air on a trajectory toward the sister's forehead, brothers must react in such a way as to negate the bullet. They must discover gaps in the theory of relativity. They must thwart Newton's laws. There's a theory that for every 11 billion times you drop a pencil, the pencil will rise instead of fall. No, Zelda starts up. She's yelling, not at me, but to various objects around the room. She hits the coffee machine onto the carpet. She throws the remote control into an ice bucket where it bobs like the carcass of a long-dead sea animal. She falls onto Marcy, a shawl expanding over him. Her back has Marcy's handprints on it. I can see the chorus of pink fingertips from my end of the room. From here, they are each very distinct and very, very far away. So, that's it. But I kind of, before anything else happens, I kind of wanted to talk about the story. And, like, why would I write it? And as I was reading, I'm like, Tee that's kind of dirty. Why did I read that part? Why did I write that part? Why did I focus on this subject matter? So before I read it, I talked about how sometimes when you write something, you think you're writing about one thing, but you're actually writing about something else. Hopefully I'm not the kind of like vaguely pervy asshole that my main character, my narrator, seems to be. And I don't have a sister, which means, of course, I don't have a sibling who has developmental issues. But what I do have is someone in my family who's very close to me has a mental illness. And I've never actually written about this family member who has a mental illness. And it's a funny thing about family members because they can do very bad things. They can irritate you. In fact, they can make your life really hellish. But at the same time, you're weirdly obligated to love them on some level. And when I think about this story, and when I ask myself, okay, is this me? Am I just really pissed off that my ex left me for her roommate, which didn't happen? What I actually realize is that I'm writing in this story about my family member who has a mental illness. In the same way that Scotty, or Scott, my narrator, feels at once compelled to do this really socially awkward, wildly inappropriate, depending on your religious views and upbringing, thing for his sister. At the same time, it really pisses him off. When I read the first few lines, I always feel really weird and guilty because their relationship, at once they're brother and sister, but Scotty's also, in a way, her father, right? And when you're a parent, that's a very different relationship than being a brother or sister. So as I read this story over, and as I was reading it to you guys, I remember the way I felt about my family member who has a mental illness and who sometimes I wish would just explode and wouldn't be a factor in my life whatsoever. But then that other half of me is utterly compelled to love them, to do anything for them, to, if it came to that, take them to a hotel so they can lose their virginity in a way that's comforting to them. Of course, it all goes wrong for them at the end, in a way, and my main character can't help but lash out violently. And in a way, I'm doing on paper what I can't do in real life. I just can't slap my family member in the face. I can't, beat up his or her partner or whatever. But this is something I think that makes fiction and telling stories super valuable. It's not often that you can take yourself and imagine you're someone completely different. And I think that's what the best writing should do. A writer I know who's far more famous and definitely more handsome than I am, I asked him flat out, I said, okay, what's the secret? What's the secret to writing? Give me if you had to give me one magical key, the magic wand for becoming a great storyteller or a great writer, because he was an exceptional storyteller. What he said was empathy. And I said, that's the biggest pile of crap I've ever heard, empathy. But then I started thinking about it. And I think what he was trying to say is that all good writers or all good storytellers have to imagine what it's like to be someone else. Because we go through our lives in our own bodies, with our own issues, that to be an effective storyteller, to actually credibly write a character, you have to think, what's it like for them? The other story I was going to read was from a woman's point of view. And the story I have in that thing is actually from a woman's point of view. And trying to figure out what it's like to live as someone radically different from me, who has different issues, who has a different upbringing, who, day-to-day life has a completely wildly different experience than me. It's a challenge, but it's also, I think, a testament to why we tell stories, why books matter, why novels matter. I'll even say why TV matters. But that's kind of why I chose to tell this story, because it forced me to, on the one hand, be really pissed off, which I frankly needed to be, and second, to kind of imagine what a pissed off version of me would look like. Someone who does something that I don't necessarily agree with. That's all. So, I don't know what time it is. Oh,
For 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. You guys have sheets. Ingrid gave you guys sheets that you're somehow obligated to fill out. Cruel as she is. Does anybody have any questions? Anything? Yeah.
What's your best way to come up with a title? Would you say you use a line from your story that really works well, or?
That one sounds familiar. That question sounds familiar. Yeah, you know what? That's a good question because the story I was going to read, the title of it is "The Perfect Man for My Husband," and that's kind of a story in of itself. Why would you need to find the perfect man? Sometimes it comes from a line in the story. With the thing in there, it's called "Eat Fist" with an exclamation mark. I just thought it sounded cool, to be honest with you. But I like absolutely deplore titles that just like, like The Horse or something. It's just completely boring. Like make it a unicorn at least or something, you know what I mean? But I try to find something, either a line in the story or something that tells a secret about the story. In the same way where they're teaching you how to write those hamburger essays, like intro, conclusion, you get to your conclusion and it starts specific and goes into something else. I kind of do that with titles, where my title, after you read it, you're like, wow, that was about a unicorn, but not in the way I thought, type of thing. So 4 minutes, the title of this comes from, that's how long the umbilical cord choked his sister.
Obviously, no skill to put a character involved in that.
Yeah, so that's the other element about it, is the guilt deal, because how do you account for something? Like, I grind my teeth at night, and, when I first started grinding my teeth, I thought I had like a million cavities, and I was just this disgusting, unhygienic person. But then the dentist said, no, you just grind your teeth. And on the one hand, I was super excited because, I have good dental health. On the other hand, I'm like, there's nothing I can do about it. How do you atone for a sin that you weren't conscious you committed? Let's say someone's done something really bad to someone, and later in life, the victim, confronts this guy. He's got Alzheimer's, and he doesn't remember doing anything wrong. How does that work? These are questions that, when I'm sitting at home with my cats knitting, I kind of ask myself, like, weird, ethically, emotionally ambiguous situations where people love and hate at the same time, where you feel kind of simultaneous emotional impulses. Anybody else? Yeah?
What projects do you have lined up for
Yeah.
20 years?
Yeah, good. Good for you. Good for you. Okay, when you start writing, you start off, if you're trying to pick up women by writing poems, but then you realize really quickly that you're terrible at it. But you might be better at telling stories. So you start by writing short stories, and short stories don't sell very much. Sometimes you'll get lucky, you'll win a prize, you'll get it published in a magazine. Maybe someone will think you're God after reading it. That's never happened to me personally. But I've been writing these short stories for a while. And then I finally decided to put my big boy boots on and start writing a novel. And I wanted to, does that person want to, you can come in, it's okay. I started thinking about this mental illness thing. That's another reason why I wanted to read the story, is because I'm working on a novel. And the novel is set in kind of 1940s, 1950s Paris. And it's about a psychiatrist whose life absolutely goes to shit. When one of his cases, a very famous client, wrote a book about him, kills himself. And the father of this client says, I'm going to ruin your life. But he has one shot at getting his career back on track. And he has to cure a woman who thinks she's already dead. There's murder, sex, obviously, and a twist. And so it's about mental illness. It's about him trying to find out why this woman believes that she's dead. And there's only been like 100 cases of this condition ever. But I'm kind of interested in stuff like that. like podcasts about weird things. So that's what I'm working on.
Do you have a working title?
No, the unicorn. That seems to be the word of the day. No, but it's. I thought I had an excerpt from it, but I think I misplaced it. Sorry. Any other questions? Yeah, Nancy.
Were you writing fiction when you were a student here?
Yeah, when I was, I came here a mere 4 months after Poem Girl accepted my hand in a relationship. Mere 4 months.
See, look at your works.
Well, we're not together anymore, but I got the cats in the divorce, so I'm way ahead in the game. But yeah, actually I started, let's see here. I started writing when I was here, and I took a short story class. And I also, there's a gentleman in the back room, I forget, he's standing up, I think he's leaving. I read a book in his class I really liked, and that kind of got me kind of thinking about the different ways you can tell stories. Thank you, Nancy. Anybody else who's not paid to be here? Oh, Brian, you're almost paid to be here.
A question about writing and ethics. You talked about the creative process as involving creating others and developing empathetic relationships.
Oh, I know where
You
this
also
is
gave
going.
away in the midst of your reading that somebody had once said to you, let's get stale. Like you were more eloquent. The process also obviously involves using things that other people have said and done. And I'm just wondering, do you ever find yourself wrestling with an ethical dilemma involving using stuff that people say to you?
I'm completely wildly unethical. I mine the people I love for their lives and like hurl it against them. No, that's actually not true. What's interesting about that question and what I found when I was doing this is that as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh my God, that is so brilliant. I'm glad I came up with that over breakfast. But in fact, I don't even realize sometimes and later, like, I'm sure someone out there somewhere has used, like if you've seen that Planet Earth DVD with these two, they're snails, but they're lovely, right? They look like they're from like an LSD trip you had in the 60s. I'm sure somebody has talked about that somewhere. Because I don't write autobiographically, but it slips in. It's pretty rare that I explicitly take something from someone's life or something that's that has happened to me explicitly. But sometimes it bleeds in like that. Plus I'm like wild. I think George Eliot Clark, he's like Order of Canada Canadian poet, famous for publishing a book of poetry with more naked pictures of women in it than poems. He goes, "Hey Andrew, if you ain't pissing someone off, you're not doing a good job." Well, he was just annoying, but I think what he was trying to say, without being irritating, is that good writing has to take risks. And this is more, this is beyond the ethics of me just warping the lives of those around me. I think what he's trying to say is that good writing has to take risks. Whether that means, for example, one of the things I was really terrified of is actually what Scotty says about his sister. I'm worried about making her like a child. And how do I ethically and adequately represent someone who's very different from me, who's marginalized in society? I mean, people who are mentally ill, people who have developmental issues. In fact, there are a whole slew of kind of marginalized demographics of social groups that I'm not a part of. Like, I have it pretty good in terms of, unlike a straight white guy who has a middle-class education, and trying to think about, could I write a story about someone wildly different? Is that ethical? The answer is probably not, but I'm going to do it anyways because I think it's important. It's an important act to try to imagine someone different from you, and I think that's where people who might not necessarily collide in like a non-offensive way, like people who don't connect quite well, ostensibly out there in the world, there's that word again, can do it on fiction, can do it, but you have to be aware of it, and to be aware of kind of how dangerous it might be to try to, you know, avoid stereotypes and all that stuff. So I was terrified. So there you go.
I just have maybe one more question for you. You do have a day job. And this,
No.
the students should hear that because.
Okay, yeah, you want to talk about that deal?
I do, sorry.
I got you. Okay, yeah, day job. So I've actually had a lot of different jobs. I was a carny. I was just telling them, literally I was a carny one summer. I've worked as a court transcriptionist. I've worked writing financial textbooks despite having no financial acumen or competence whatsoever. And right now I'm a teacher. And I teach creative writing in a private high school in Toronto. And part of what Ingrid is nudging me towards is talking about maybe finding a balance between my writing life and my work life. And none of you are teachers except for some of you. And the some of you that are can say that it's really tough kind of balancing talking about writing, especially if you're a humanities teacher, talking about writing and your writing, marking stuff. And frankly, your jobs might suck even if they have nothing to do with writing. But writing is one of those things like soccer, cricket, footy, as it were. Anyways, where the only thing that's going to keep it remotely, the only way you're going to be successful at it, and the only way you're going to keep doing it, is if you approach it passionately, and if you recognize that it's going to be what you're writing on your lunch break, while you're riding, you know, whatever. It used to be the one Kip's Lane I used to ride around in this place. But all kind of creative acts have to come from that place of passion, and you have to be willing to be like, well, my job sucks. I had the crappiest day. Let's see, I can go down like on Richmond Road and get hammered, or I can write the short story. And sometimes you're going to get hammered, but every so often you write a short story. That's all.
Andrew does teach at a private school, and his principal gave him the day to come down here, so partly she could promote that he is a writer.
She's evil.
Who teaches there. So we're very happy to have you. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thanks, guys.